this time. We don't know how old. I'm just between 13 and 18 years old is just a guess. I think it's a fairly reasonable guess. He and four others are mentioned as well. They will become Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, or at least that's the names that they will be given. I guess it's easy for us to say Daniel instead of Belteshazzar, which is the name that he was given. Anyway, these four young men, and the idea is that there were other young men of royal parentage, of royal lineage. The best of the young men of Judah were taken into captivity, probably along with hundreds and perhaps thousands of others that were taken. But these special young men were selected to be special servants of the king. And Daniel was one of them. And one of the first situations that we encounter here in chapter 1 is that the young men were given food to eat from the king's table, or rather from his supply. And there were, we don't know exactly what they were, but Daniel did not want to be defiled by the things that were offered to him. And we don't know exactly what those things were. But it is a good guess, probably really more than that, an assumption that there were things on the king's table that would have been in violation, would have put them in violation of the law of Moses. And so Daniel objected, and what was the man's name? Let me just... Azariah, what was his name in verse? Ashpenaz, the master of the eunuchs, he wanted Daniel and the others to continue to eat this food from the king's table, but of course Daniel and the others objected and said that they didn't want to do that. And so Daniel proposed a test. Let us eat vegetables, only vegetables, for 10 days. And allow us to see if we are better, if we are healthier than the others who are eating from the king's table. And of course, that test was given, that test was followed. And we read in verse 15, at the end of 10 days, their features appeared better and fatter in flesh than all the young men who ate the portion of the king's delicacies. Thus, verse 16, the steward took away their portion of delicacies and the wine that they were to drink, and gave them vegetables. And so all of the young people, all of the young men who were chosen to be these special servants, they were all now put on the same diet as Daniel and his four friends. Well, this distinguishes Daniel and the four others in the eyes of Ashpenaz. Okay, but there were going to be other things that distinguish them, more important things that distinguish these four men. So let's read here in verses 17 through 21 of Daniel chapter 1. As for these four young men, God gave them knowledge and skill in all literature and wisdom, and Daniel had understanding in all visions and dreams. Now at the end of the days, when the king had said that they should be brought in, the chief of the eunuchs brought them in before Nebuchadnezzar. Then the king interviewed them, and among them all none was found like Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Therefore they served before the king. And in all matters of wisdom and understanding about which the king examined them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and astrologers who were in his realm. Thus Daniel continued until the first year of King Cyrus. And so there are a number of things for us to think about here. Notice here that the result was a good one, and these four young men are going to be distinguished even further. God is going to give them, and this is to be compared, this phrase in verse 17 is to be compared with what we just read in chapter 1, verses 1 and 2, where God gave Jehoiakim and Judah into the hand of Nebuchadnezzar. So there is a pattern being established, and you're going to see this pattern throughout the book of Daniel, that God is the one who is in charge. God is the one who gives kings and kingdoms their power and their influence, which again brings us back to the theme of this great book, that God works in the kingdoms and in the affairs of men. You see that being highlighted again and again in the book of Daniel, and you see that here in verse 17. This indicates that God was involved in helping these young men and guiding them. And these young men are faithful to God, and they believe in God, and they're following Him, and they're doing all the things that God wants them to do as faithful servants, not so much of Nebuchadnezzar, although they are faithful to him, but they are faithful to the Lord. And so not only was the diet improved, but God is giving them these special skills. Daniel, it seems to be singled out here, and he is given the special skill of understanding mysteries. Of course, that means in the form of revelation, and that would come to him in the form of visions and dreams, especially beginning in chapter 6 or chapter 7 through chapter 12. Chapter 7 through 12 of the book of Daniel, all it is pretty much visions and dreams that Daniel reveals, or that Daniel is given. And chapter 5, for example, and chapter 4 shows other dreams that the kings are having, and Daniel interprets those dreams. But chapter 7 through 12, Daniel himself is given dreams and visions and writes those things down. Sometimes Daniel was told not to write them down, but Daniel writes these visions down. Anyway, this miraculous skill is given to him, and it will be used in a dramatic way in the chapters that follow. At the end of the days, at the end of these 10 days, we read in verse 18, and probably when it says now at the end of the days, it may very well mean at the end of the 3 years. Probably means that. At the end of the 3 years, they're given 3 years of training. At the end of that time, they come before the king and with the chief of the eunuchs, and brought them before Nebuchadnezzar. And this is undoubtedly the best crop of young men that Nebuchadnezzar has ever been before, where he interviews them. So we read in verse 19 that he interviewed them, and among them all none was found like these 4 young men, and thus they served before the king. Verse 20 is an important matter. See, Daniel chapter 1 just sets the stage for what we're going to be seeing out of Daniel and in the life of Daniel throughout his entire career. In all matters of wisdom and understanding, about which the king examined them. How he questioned them, how he did that, we don't know. But he found them 10 times better. How you would measure that, I don't know. But it's certainly an expression, one that we even use today. We would say, well, this was 10 times better. This trip that we went on this year was 10 times better than the trip we were on last year. We will use expressions like that, or 100 times better, or whatever. But it is undoubtedly an expression signifying complete satisfaction on the part of the king. These young men are superior intellectually, physically, and spiritually, and they exceed the abilities of all of those who had been serving before the king, among the magicians and astrologers. You know, in a pagan kingdom like this, there would be great dependence on astrologers and magicians and the priests before the pagan deities and the temples and all of that. Great dependence on their words and their influence and their advice. And we're going to find them in a lot of hot water here in the next chapter. But verse 21, look at that. Thus Daniel continued until the first year of King Cyrus. So Daniel, this really speaks of the longevity of Daniel. He was active actually into the third year of King Cyrus's reign. He outlasted, and this is the great thing, the involvement of God in all of this. He outlasted those who conquered his people and those who conquered his land. Okay? So he's going to live beyond the time of Darius, beyond the time of Nebuchadnezzar and Belshazzar and others. And so Daniel lived in Babylon for nearly the entire stretch of Judah's captivity, about 70 years. Okay? So it's a long time. And so we're introduced to Daniel here. Now when we go over to chapter 2, and according to the outline that we are following, we're calling this the prophetic plan for the Gentiles. Okay? This is God's plan for what's going to be happening among the Gentile kingdoms of this time. In chapter 2, we find Nebuchadnezzar's dream, his first dream. He's going to have another one of a great tree, but this is the first dream that he has. And we're going to be looking now at verses 1 through 13 and Nebuchadnezzar's dream and how this is concealed. He wants to know what the meaning of the dream is and can't find any help for that. So now in the second year of Nebuchadnezzar's reign, Nebuchadnezzar had dreams, and his spirit was so troubled that his sleep left him. Then the king gave the command to call the magicians, the astrologers, the sorcerers, and the Chaldeans to tell the king his dreams. So they came and stood before the king. And the king said to them, I have had a dream, and my spirit is anxious to know the dream. Then the Chaldeans spoke to the king in Aramaic. O king, live forever. Tell your servants the dream, and we will give the interpretation. The king answered and said to the Chaldeans, My decision is firm. If you do not make known the dream to me and its interpretation, you shall be cut in pieces, and your houses shall be made an ash heap. Now, is this an empty threat? Well, it's a threat. We'll see if it's empty or not. However, if you tell the dream and its interpretation, you shall receive from me gifts, rewards, and great honor. Therefore, tell me the dream and its interpretation. They answered again and said, Let the king tell his servants the dream, and we will give its interpretation. The king answered and said, I know for certain that you would gain time because you see that my decision is firm. If you do not make known the dream to me, there is only one decree for you. For you have agreed to speak lying and corrupt words before me till the time is changed. Therefore tell me the dream, and I shall know that you can give me its interpretation. The Chaldeans answered the king and said, There is not a man on earth who can tell the king's matter. Therefore, no king, lord, or ruler has ever asked such things of any magician, astrologer, or Chaldean. It is a difficult thing that the king requests, and there is no other who can tell it to the king except the gods, whose dwelling is not with flesh. For this reason, the king was angry and very furious, and gave a command to destroy all the wise men of Babylon. So the decree went out, and they began killing the wise men, and they sought Daniel and his companions to kill them. Now that's the setup. Wow. There's a lot of things going on here. Primarily, the king has this dream. Remember, the Lord is involved in these affairs, and the Lord is the one who gave this dream to Nebuchadnezzar. Why he chose him, I don't know, other than his great power and his great influence. And whatever came from the king's dream, that probably made, the king's dream probably made front page headlines, okay? People would hear about this. People would hear about all of the goings on in connection to the king's dream and what it meant and what that was about. And then whoever would come along and give the interpretation, that would be reported as well. And that news would spread all over. I imagine that that's the reason why the Lord gave this king this dream to Nebuchadnezzar. Anyway, he was troubled by the things that he saw in his dream. Have you ever had a dream that troubled you? I mean, you go to bed at night and you have a dream and it troubles you. Have you ever? I was just thinking, it's weird that I had this dream last week about lions, 2 lions escaping from the zoo, okay? I mean, I had this dream, it's crazy, and it seemed so real to me, okay? So somebody tell me the meaning of it. So these lions, and they were making their way into a neighborhood, it doesn't matter what neighborhood it was, and I saw these lions coming the way into the neighborhood, and in the neighborhood, everybody was outside. People were riding their bikes, and they were skateboarding, and they were throwing, baseballs, and people were sitting on their lawn chairs. The neighborhood was full of people. Everybody was coming out. And I was in my truck, and I felt like I needed to go around and tell everybody, lions are loose. Get in your homes, And I said that a couple of times. I don't know if I woke Beth up or not, but that was a dream that I had. Have you ever had a dream like that? Wow. I don't think God gave me that dream. I don't think so. There's no reason for it, But Nebuchadnezzar, he had a dream, and he had a lot of detail in this dream. And it's just an amazing thing. But we don't know what the dream is. We don't know what it is. And Nebuchadnezzar, he's pretty smart. And he knows that if someone can give the interpretation of the dream, which is what he really wants, he knows what the dream is. He knows what it is. He knows the details of it. He just doesn't know its interpretation. And he knows that if the wise men of Babylon can give him the interpretation, well, then they could tell him the dream itself, the details of the dream. And so that's what he's pressing for. That's what he's pressing for. It's time for the astrologers and magicians and Chaldeans to earn their money. They get paid. They get taken care of by the king. And now it's time where he needs them to come forward and interpret this dream for him. And look at what they're doing. And look at, Nebuchadnezzar knows what they're doing. They're stalling. They're stalling for time. King, you tell us the dream, and then we'll tell you the interpretation. What's wrong with that? What's wrong with that suggestion? You tell us the dream, king, and we'll tell you the interpretation. What's wrong with that? Yeah. They can make up anything. Yeah, they could say anything they want. Oh yeah, you saw a great statue. You're telling us you saw a great statue. Okay, here's what it's gold and bronze and silver and clay and iron, all this stuff. Well, here's what that means. And they could just make up anything they wanted to, okay? And yeah. Right. Yeah. And if you set yourself up and say, well, I'm going to trust what you say about my interpretation, then you're kind of surrendering to them. You're surrendering, you're yielding yourself to them, and whatever they want to say that interpretation is, they are having influence over you, and that could influence you to make decisions and choices about this. Someone reads my palm, and says, well, you're going to meet someone, and within, the next 30 days, and there's going to be a wealthy person. Well, what am I going to be doing then? I'm going to be looking, and I'm going to be watching for this person that I'm supposed to meet, and that kind of thing. And to tell, palm reading, and that's the kind of thing that we're looking at here. But the king, he knows what's going on, and he notice here. In verse 8, I know for certain that you would gain time because you see that my decision is firm. You're stalling. Maybe the situation is that they came before the king. He told them about the dream that he had. I want you to tell me the dream. I want you to tell me the interpretation. And those guys may have left that and came back in a week or whatever and had a conference. And so they're stalling for time. They're hoping that the king will forget the dream. You know, you forget those dreams. You know, you forget them. And you forget some of the details. And that's what they're hoping that the king will do. Yeah, John. Yeah, really good. Very good, very good. You know, I like this. I like this thing that is said in verse 10 and 11. The Chaldeans finally answer the king. You know, what you're expecting of us, nobody can do this. No one has ever required this of wise men and astrologers and magicians, that they would tell the dream and also the interpretation. No one has ever. So you're requiring something of us that's just too much. It's too much. Scott. Yeah. Right. Mm-hmm. Good. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. All right, good. Joanne, please. Well, probably, maybe the part that I'm not emphasizing enough is that they're not just astrologers and magicians and wise men, but these men claim to be getting their information and their power and influence to do these things from the gods. Okay, the gods, the false gods that Nebuchadnezzar believes in, and that these individuals believe in. I mean, they're not. These are people who follow the gods, whatever gods are existing in Babylon, and there were many of them. So they are supposed to be getting their abilities from the gods. And so, yes, Nebuchadnezzar expects them to be able to know what the dream is and its interpretation, and therefore advise him. I mean, that's who really they are. They're advisors, okay? Advisors from the gods. And so Nebuchadnezzar expects good information and good counsel from them. Good, good. Yeah, Bill, please. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. Isn't it something, when you look at Daniel chapter 1 and you look at the person this Daniel is and the others, okay, the other four, these are men who are in tune with God, they're seeking God, they want to do God's will. But as far as the powers that be, Nebuchadnezzar and Ashpenaz and those guys, they're not picking up yet. They're not picking up on the influence of God in the lives of these young men, okay? And we're told in chapter 1, God is giving these young men these special skills, these special abilities. It's not just about your diet, it's about the head and the heart that these young men possess. And these skills, these abilities, miraculous, are going to start coming into play now. And that's the setup of chapter 1. And now Nebuchadnezzar is about to confront the power of God in a way that he didn't recognize before. God's already at work. Remember, verses 1 and 2, God's already at work. He gave Jehoiakim and Judah into the hand of Nebuchadnezzar. God is the one who is working in all of this, and he's going to continue to work in the life of Daniel and really in the life of Nebuchadnezzar as well, through Daniel. So, anyway, so this is some great stuff. I just like this. I like the verses 10 and 11. Finally, the wise men say, we can't do this, and you're asking us too much. You're asking way too much of us. And verse 12, Nebuchadnezzar didn't appreciate being rebuked, a mild rebuke, in that way, and so we read that he was angry and very furious and gave a command to destroy all the wise men of Babylon. And that means, even if we didn't have verse 13, that would mean Daniel and, of course, the others would be killed as well. Yeah. Yeah, that's probably right. And especially when he puts them to the test and they come up short. I mean, they're just not able to deliver. They're not able to give the king what he is requiring of them. And he has every reason to expect, considering their relationship to the gods, his relationship to the gods. Nebuchadnezzar is all about trying to please the gods. I mean, that's what he wants to do. He wants to please the gods. And whatever dream he is having, he thinks that this is coming from the gods. And the spokesman for the gods, the astrologers, wise men, they ought to be able to tell them what the meaning of this dream is. And they can't. They come up short. How much doubt this is causing in the mind of Nebuchadnezzar, I don't know. But he's going to have his eyes opened very shortly. Okay, about all of that. So verse 13 closes, the decree went out, and they began killing the wise men. How many died, we don't know, but they sought Daniel and his companions to kill them. Okay, so, wow. So the king's threat was not an idle threat. It's coming to pass. So then we come to the revelation of the dream, beginning in verse 14. Then with counsel and wisdom, Daniel answered Arioch, the captain of the king's guard, who had gone out to kill the wise men of Babylon. He answered and said to Arioch, the king's captain, why is the decree from the king so urgent? And Arioch made the decision known to Daniel. Remember, Daniel seems to have some rapport. He has the favor of Ashpenaz first, and now looks like he has the favor of the king's guard, because this man would be under no obligation. I mean, he's there to kill Daniel and others. He has no obligation to give any kind of explanation, anything like that. And Daniel asks for some kind of explanation, And he makes it known to Daniel. So Daniel went in and asked the king because Daniel must have had some kind of access to the king as a servant of the king. So he went in to the king himself and asked the king to give him time that he might tell the king the interpretation. Did he say that? Did he just say, I need more time? Or did he say, I need more time and then I will tell you the interpretation? Probably what he did. He probably said, I can get that for you, but I need a little bit of time. And Nebuchadnezzar may be scratching his head, what do you need time for? What do you need time for? Why does Daniel need time? Why does he need time? What's that? All right, to make his appeal to God. Okay, to pray to God. To what degree, God gave this ability to reveal things and to have visions. He gave this to Daniel. But maybe it came only at certain times when God wanted it to come to Daniel. And certainly that's true when we think of chapter 7 and beyond. So you kind of get the feeling that when you look at the apostles and the early Christians who had the miraculous gifts of the Spirit, perhaps they were not able to call forth the power in these signs just always when they wanted to, okay? Maybe they had to pray first and seek God's guidance and His help in order to work these miracles. And Daniel certainly is under the impression that he cannot give the interpretation until he spends some time speaking to God and talking to Him about it. Laura, please. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, and in pieces and in parts. Yeah, good, great. Okay. So we read here, beginning in verse 14, that this was happening then with counsel and wisdom. Daniel answered Arioch, why is the decree, verse 15, why is the decree from the king so urgent? Then Arioch made the decision known to Daniel. So Daniel went in and asked the king to give him time that he might tell the king the interpretation. Then Daniel went to his house and made the decision known to Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, his companions, that they might seek mercies from the God of heaven concerning this secret, so that Daniel and his companions might not perish with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. Then the secret was revealed to Daniel in a night vision. So Daniel blessed the God of heaven. Daniel answered and said, Blessed be the name of God forever and ever, for wisdom and might are His. And He changes the times and the seasons. He removes kings and raises up kings. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to those who have understanding. He reveals deep and secret things. He knows what is in the darkness, and light dwells with Him. I thank you and praise you, O God of my fathers. You have given me wisdom and might, and have now made known to me what we asked of you, for you have made known to us the king's demand. So Daniel spends time in prayer with Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, his companions. They too are seeking the Lord's help and His guidance in this matter. Were all the wise men killed? I don't know to what degree the wise men were killed, but these are men who are wicked men from my point of view, and so maybe they were killed. Others were killed. Maybe they were killed after the interpretation of the dream as well. Yeah, go ahead, Jerry.
I don't know if I'm reading too much into verse 16, but the way I read that is Daniel went directly to the king.
Yeah, I think so.
I think we think about his faith. A king that already gave the decree to kill all the wise men, and Daniel's going to go in front of him and say, "Hey,
Sure.
give me a little more time." Exactly what the other wise men think about this whole story of Daniel, and we talked about this a couple Sundays ago, in our day and age, all these big corporations pushing this agenda that is so against God. And how do we stand with our faith and working for companies that are 100% opposed to God? And I look at Daniel and say, he served the king, so he opposed to God, but yet he kept his faith, and that's seen another example here, going directly to the king and saying, give me time, I can do this.
Yeah.
Could have lost his life immediately.
Yes, yes. Could have lost his head, if I could say, he could have lost his head, but he kept his head. He kept his head on God and doing His will. And so he went boldly to the king. I would think that, yeah, he went before the king, told him I need more time, and maybe he also said, and I'll get you the interpretation. Daniel, no doubt, he knew he had this ability to reveal dreams and visions and that kind of thing. But he also knew that that power wasn't his, that it came from God. And so he needed to go to God and pray about this. And sure enough, we read in verse 19 that the secret was revealed to Daniel in a night vision. And that's when Daniel blessed the Lord for what he had done. Just imagine the same dream that was given to Nebuchadnezzar is now given to Daniel, and in what fashion the vision was spoken to Daniel, we don't know, a night vision, but then he spelled out to Daniel the meaning of the dream and what that was about. And if that's true, and it seems to have been that's what happened, then Daniel must have been so impressed by what was going to happen in the future. Imagine being told by God what was going to be happening over the next 500, 600, 700 years or more. What was going to be happening, okay? And kingdoms were going to come and go. Just amazing that this was happening. And sure enough, we read verse 20, that Daniel, like Paul in Ephesians chapter 3 and elsewhere, he's given to praise. We want to praise the Lord, and that's what he does. Notice, look at the things that he says about the Lord's control, that the Lord is in control of wisdom, he says here, and might, the changing of times and seasons. This is what the Lord is in charge of. Kings and governments. Okay? People in positions of power, kings, governments, presidents, congressmen and women, Supreme Court, they think that they have the supreme power. But actually they don't. God is the one who is in charge. God is in control. The knowledge and understanding of men, deep and secret things, God has control of that. He knows what's in the darkness. In other words, what cannot be seen by us, God can see those things clearly. And light is in Him. Light is in Him. And so Daniel, he claims nothing for himself. He acknowledges the Lord's presence, the Lord's resources, and the revelation that he has been given. And he also acknowledges his connection with the God of history. Notice that he says, I thank you and praise you, O God of my fathers. O God of my fathers. That's a common expression, reference to God, God of my fathers. But when you say that, like Daniel was saying it here, Daniel is referring to, people like Abraham that he knew about. And Isaac, and Moses, and Noah. Daniel must be familiar with those characters. Refers to God as the God of his fathers. You've given me wisdom and might, and have made known to me what we asked of you. So we asked God to give us this interpretation, and he praises God for having done so. All right. That brings us to a good conclusion right there. Verses 24 through verse 45 we'll begin looking at next week, which takes us, of course, into the dream itself. A powerful, powerful vision of what is going to happen in the future, and Daniel's going to reveal all of that. Thank you all for coming to our class this morning.